Welcome, class, to the next unit. So, in chapter one, we talked about the basics of biology, domains and kingdoms. We talked about the basic chemistry. We're talking basics of cells. For unit two, we're going to start talking about energy, specifically cellular respiration, which is how cells get energy, and photosynthesis, which is how plants produce sugars. And I'm checking something real quick. Before we do that, though, in chapter four, we're going to go over some basics. Basics of chemical reactions, different types. We're going to talk about ATP, enzymes, and lastly, we'll talk about membrane transport. I'll break this down into three parts, with the first part being chemical reactions. And before we get to that, let's talk about energy, though. So, energy is the ability to do work. Anytime we do work, anytime we're walking around, we're exercising, talking, we're doing homework, thinking, anything like that, we are using energy because our body is doing work. Our cells also need energy because they also do work. Any types of processes that happens within the cell, if they're building a molecule, if they're breaking something down, are using or making energy. So energy is a big thing within the cell. The cells need energy. Life needs energy. And there's two general forms of energy, and these are going to be very general. Kinetic energy, which is energy in motion, and potential energy, which is stored energy. And that's how I want you to think about this. Kinetic is energy in motion, potential is stored energy. So if we look at this example on the left with the biker on the hill, at the top of the hill, if he's staying at the top, he has a lot of potential energy, a lot of stored energy because he can go back down. Once he goes down that hill, he is moving again. At the bottom of the hill, the bicyclist is going off. He is riding on his bike, going fast. Now he has energy in motion, which is kinetic energy. So that potential energy is being transformed into kinetic energy. And the same with the spring example on the right. We have a compressed spring that has high potential energy. It can move the tennis ball. And then once we extend the spring, we have kinetic energy that's being transferred into the ball to throw it in the air. So these are both examples of potential energy, either something at the top of the hill or the spring being compressed, and kinetic energy, which is energy in motion, that bicyclist moving at the bottom of the hill or the tennis ball flying in the air. Within chemical bonds, we also have energy. We have a glucose molecule here. And molecules such as glucose, triglycerides, or any other molecule, within their bond is stored energy. Remember, stored energy is potential energy. So it's energy that the molecule is storing currently. To release the energy, the cell breaks the bond. So when a bond is being broken, energy is being released. So this is kinetic energy, energy in motion, or energy being used. So we can think bonds have potential energy. When they're broken, they make kinetic energy that can be used. So, and now with that being said, we're going to talk about what's called the first law of thermodynamics. So this is what the textbook gives as the definition. I'm going to give you another one that I like a lot more. Right at the bottom. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Only transferred. So energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's only transferred from one form to another, from potential to kinetic. It can be kinetic to potential as well. And within biology, we have two examples of this happening. cellular respiration, and photosynthesis. So, cells are able to use chemical energy, which is the energy within a bond. So, this is energy and bonds. So, in this example, though, we have the sun that in this case we're saying has kinetic energy. Photosynthesis takes that kinetic energy, converts it into sugars, which is potential energy because sugars have a lot of chemical bonds. So photosynthesis goes from kinetic to potential. Now, if you look carefully though, notice how during photosynthesis, heat energy is produced. And during cellular respiration, heat is also produced. So any type of transfer of energy is not 100% efficient. Some energy is lost, and that is lost in the form of heat most likely. That energy cannot be gathered back, it is just simply lost. Our body heat is produced by this loss of energy. So, and then the next part, I want to skip and talk about cellular respiration right now. So, remember, photosynthesis, we go from kinetic energy from the sun to make potential energy in sugars. Cellular respiration is the opposite. We're taking that potential energy, going through photosynthesis to make kinetic energy, or chemical energy, excuse me. We are transferring that potential energy to new chemical energy that helps power reactions within the cell. So this whole process between photosynthesis and cellular respiration is that transfer of energy from one form to another. And cells constantly use energy to build molecules and structures, perform chemical reactions, and just carry out life's processes. So cells will have to go through this process just in order to function. And photosynthesis only occurs in plants, though. Now, let's talk about metabolism. Metabolism includes all the chemical reactions within the cell. When we talk about in terms of humans, metabolism is all the chemical reactions, the sum of your chemical reactions within our body. So we have two things we're going to look at. I'll put a line here too. So we have some reactions that are building complex molecules and forming new bonds. And we have some reactions that are breaking complex molecules and by breaking complex molecules and thus they are breaking chemical bonds. So sometimes reactions build molecules, sometimes reactions break molecules. So keep that in mind and how when we build, energy has to go in because we are making bonds. And where bonds hold energy, such a make a bond, making chemical bond, we need energy. When we're breaking something, energy goes out. Potential energy within the bond is released and it goes out of the molecule. And that is important because these are the first two types of reactions we're going to talk about. And I do want you to know each type. First is endergonic reactions. When you hear endergonic, I want you to think enter. When you hear endergonic, I want you to think enter. So in this example, we're really going to focus on these chemical reactions right here in the center. So at the top, we have carbon dioxide and water that's used to make sugar, which is a big molecule, and then oxygen. Since we are building something, we need energy. Energy is entering the system. And then at the bottom, we have these four little blocks. In order to combine them into these rectangles, we need energy. We are forming bonds, which are these little bonds right here. So we need energy. And then to make them into a square, we need even more energy. So with endergonic reactions, energy is going into the system and it's building molecules, forms bonds to build molecules. So endergonic energy enters to build. Endergonic energy enters to build. Versus exergonic. When you hear exergonic, think exit. And in this one, the reaction that breaks bonds to release energy. Breaks bonds to release energy. So if we go back to our example down here, we go from oxygen and glucose, which again we said was a big molecule, to carbon dioxide and water. Since we're breaking something, energy leaves the system. It's exiting. And at the bottom example, we go from our cube, we cut it in half, and we cut it in half, energy is released from those chemical bonds. And we make these rectangles. And if we cut both of those in half, more energy is released to make our little cubes, our little squares. So remember, and make sure you know the definite difference between the two. Endergonic enters. Endergonic is using energy to build. Exergonic exit. Exergonic breaks energy, exits the system when we break apart bonds. The next type we're going to talk about is what's called oxidation and reduction reactions. And before we even talk about this, let's look at this example here. So we have a lady on the left and a lady on the right. And the darker blue is on the left, the lighter blue is on the right. And then we have this present right here. So notice how the lady on the in the darker blue is giving that present over to the lady on the in the light blue. So it's moving from one person to the other. And that's a very, very basic definition of what oxidation and reduction is. The electrons are represented by this purple circle. Within the in oxidation, we have a molecule that starts off with electrons and it loses them. So oxidation, think loses electrons. But cancel. But in the flip, we have a molecule that doesn't have electrons that gains the electrons. So in reduction, we gain electrons. So you can think of this as oil rig, is the traditional way to think of this. Oil rig. Um, oxidation is losing, reduction is gaining. Oxidation is losing, reduction is gaining, and they're both talking about electrons. So again, I kind of went over this before these slides, but in oxidation, we're losing electrons. And that losing electron releases energy. So when something's oxidized, it loses electrons, and that loss of electrons releases energy because energy is stored in the electrons. Versus in our next example, reduction, reduction is gaining energy, gaining electrons, which requires energy. And notice in this example, and I'm going a little further right now, is that oxidation and reduction are paired. Both have to work together. Something has to lose electrons for something to gain electrons. You can't have one without the other. You have to have something losing electrons in order for the next thing to gain electrons. And that brings us to what's called the electron transport chain. So the electron transport chain is a series of membrane proteins that participate in sequential linked oxidation reduction reactions. So here we have electrons starting on this, what's called electron donor. Something's going to donate electrons. Goes into this protein, right? One right here. Electrons go into the next protein, follow the next one, over the next, and so forth until they finally get to this electron acceptor here. So electrons are slowly being moved from one protein to the next. And this is the last part of what's called the cellular respiration, which we'll get into next week. But know that in the electron transport chain, it's a series of oxidation and reduction reactions. Electrons are moving from one molecule to the next. And then the reason this is important too is, oh, too far, is this. Redox reactions, redox stands for reduction and oxidation. So redox reactions release small amount of energy at each step. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration use electron transport chains. So release energy in small amounts and in controlled fashions. As energy is released, cells store it and use it in other reactions. So these electron transport chains are used to pull energy away out of a molecule in a controlled fashion, and that energy can then be used in other ways. So now I'm going to read off this question and I want you to pause to answer it. In a reaction at the end of the electron transport chain, molecule X is being blinked and molecule Y is being blinked. Look at the electron. Tell me what's happening to molecule X and what's happening to Y. Okay. So we can notice that molecule X, which is the top one, it has the electron and it's giving it to molecule Y. So if we think of oil rig, then you give away the example. Here we go. We go back here. Oil rig, oxidation is losing. So molecule X is losing that electron, so it's being oxidized. Rig reduction is gaining. Molecule Y is gaining electrons, so it's being reduced. So the answer is A. Now for the next part, what is oxidation and reduction, and why are they always linked? And then answer, what would happen if in the cell if energy was released all at once instead of bit by bit in a series of steps? Again, take a minute, pause this video, and answer these questions. So remember, oxidation and reduction are linked because in order for one molecule to gain electrons, one has to lose electrons. You can't have something gain electrons without something losing electrons, and the vice versa. And what would happen if in the cell, if energy were released all at once instead of bit by bit in a series of steps? If glucose was broken down all at once, then we would not, our cells would not be able to get that energy as efficiently as possible. All the energy is released immediately, a lot of it will be released as heat and not as chemical energy, not as energy that the cell can use. So right now we will pause on this slide, and the next page, you're going to go over ATP and enzymes.